The South African energy landscape is rapidly changing. In that rapid change, we need to make sure that the grid keeps up with that rapid change. The requirements on the grid are quite huge. Hopefully, with what we've seen now as a pack of load shedding.
At the end of the day, every man has a voice, but money is the volume. So how are we actually going to get everybody around the table? What role do you see all the different parties being able to play in us getting this over the line?
The key success for me is having a generator anywhere in the country being able to connect at any point on the transmission grid without any constraint.
Welcome to the Energy Conversations podcast, your go-to source for unpacking the complexities of the South African energy sector.
Welcome back to Energy Conversations, where we break down the complexities of the South African energy sector into digestible insights. I am your host, Thokozile Zambane, and in today's episode, we are diving into the backbone of South Africa's energy system, the national grid. Throughout the season, we have spoken to the people shaping South Africa's energy future, and today we are joined by Monde Bala, who is the CEO of the National Transmission Company of South Africa, which has officially began operations in July 2024 as part of Eskom's unbundling. The NTCSA is now responsible for managing and expanding the national transmission network, which includes over 14,000 kilometers of new power lines planned over the next decade, as well as integrating more than 56 gigawatts of new generation capacity. Today, we'll explore how the NTCSA is delivering on this massive infrastructure mandate, the new independent transmission power program, as well as what it means to build a modern, responsive, and inclusive grid. Monde, welcome to Energy Conversations. It is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Thokozile. I'm happy to be here and to share some of my insights.
You've stepped into this role at a really pivotal moment. The NTCSA is live, the Transmission Development Plan is underway, and there's a lot of national expectation riding on you and your team with a major mandate to modernize and expand South Africa's transmission system. What has been top of your mind as you're leading this organization during this historic transition? What would you say has been top of mind for you?
Yeah, so Togo, there's been many top of minds dealing with a whole lot of moving parts in this place, but really the biggest issue for me is that the South African energy landscape is rapidly changing. In that rapid change, we need to make sure that the grid keeps up with that rapid change. The requirements on the grid are quite huge. Hopefully, with what we've seen now as a pack of load shedding, the big issue now moves that the grid has now become the constraint in that we cannot connect new generation because the grid is constrained in certain parts of the country. So really top of mind is how do we prepare this grid so that we make our contribution towards the ending of load shedding.
Thank you for that. And I guess, yes, at the heart of it is how are we going to build a strong grid? Because at the end of the day, over the next decade, we're not just looking at or speaking about steady progress. We're actually talking about really major build outs. So we need to ensure that our backbone, so to speak, is strong enough for this. And the latest transmission development plan lays out a very ambitious goal, right, over the next decade, looking at over 14,000 kilometers of new transmission lines. And that obviously includes an increase in significant substation capacity, as well as mentioned, the integration of 56 gigawatts of generation. So in your view, and in this role, what are some of the immediate priorities that you're looking at and as the NTCSA begins to implement on this very audacious vision?
With the focus in the past decade or so in the space of generation, which was correct, I mean, the focus had to be there. We needed to make sure that we fix the plant. That's where all the focus went. Now, as we are coming out of that winter of load shedding, now the reality of the grid now confronts us squarely in the face. But now what has happened in that decade of us focusing on generation, we have lost some of the capacity in the space of NTCSA, in the space of the grid, with minimum investment in that space, the capacity and the skills that you had there, not just from a skills point of view, but also the entire supply chain within that space, because there was no investment. It just simply died and migrated elsewhere. So we really need to start building now this capacity across the entire value chain, whether it's people getting all the skills that are required, getting all the technical expertise, lining up the supply chain in terms of material availability, also lining up our construction capacity. Because it's one thing to say that you're going to build 14,000 kilometers of line in a space of 10 years. But just the physical effort to get that done is a massive undertaking on its own. So you need to make sure that all the ducks are lining up and that you enable this delivery of this 14,000 kilometers by ensuring that all of the enablers are in place. So part of me getting into this space is to say, how do we start with that preparation? We do know that the offtake is going to be a bit slower at the beginning, but we need to ramp that up quite significantly to the point where we deliver consistently over 1,000 kilometers per annum to get us to the 14,000 by 2035.
That's quite a big vision. That's quite a big feat and a lot of work. And I think what one can then appreciate is that, there's a whole value chain approach to it. So when we speak about 14,000 kilometers of transmission lines, and as you're breaking it down, we're looking on average about 1,000 odd kilometers per annum. It then speaks to the value chain approach. So it's not just about that line we're going to have, it's the opportunities, the local opportunities we'll have, obviously, in value chain businesses, in construction sector, in the supply sector, as you've also mentioned. So I guess it, in solving this challenge, this long overdue challenge, and this crisis that we've had from a transmission line perspective, it also presents an economic growth opportunity for the country, where we are seeing unemployment numbers where they're currently sitting. And I guess also what is quite encouraging, though, is that beyond us looking at this long-term bold vision, we're already seeing some projects that are coming online, and some projects that are almost being fast-tracked. So the transmission development plan outlines about 47 fast-tracked projects, many of which are already in procurement or in construction. And from an NTCSA perspective, what are some of the factors that you would look at to determine then which of these projects should be prioritized, and what really helps accelerate progress on the ground, given the knock-on impact that the extension of the grid would have?
This undertaking, this mega build, then presents an opportunity to the country and to the economy. You will be aware that just on the energy complex, we are losing a lot of significant base load in terms of smelters that are closing down simply because the demand has been suppressed. Our local producers cannot compete in the international market because of the products have become a bit uncompetitive in the market. So we then need to say, how do we utilize this opportunity to re-industrialize the country? We are looking at a massive requirement of steel and steel manufacturing and fabrication that must take place. We are looking at a significant amount of components that have to be manufactured and supplied. We are looking at a construction capacity that will be required. From a job creation point of view, this presents a wonderful opportunity for us to stimulate job creation in a manner that really is meaningful. So putting all of those together, our view is that there's going to be a significant contribution to the economy just by doing this undertaking. So we need, as a country, to cleverly curate all of this work such that it does give this permanency in terms of economic growth, in terms of jobs that are being created, and just the overall uplift to the economy. So yeah, I think that for us is a bigger picture, which then brings us to say, how do we then execute this massive program? Yes, we will do so chunk by chunk. And the first chunk that you've spoken about is the 47 projects that you are fast tracking through the process so that we can start with the execution. So I think as on the year 2025, 2026, we're slightly ahead of what we've projected for ourselves. I think we've projected that we'll start off with a number of 423 kilometers by year end. We're well on track to get that as part of these 47 projects. So yes, we'll start to build up on that capacity as we are capacitating ourselves internally and also looking at what other opportunities out there in terms of strategic partnerships that we need to be forming because we cannot do this by ourselves. This is a country effort. This is a massive effort. This requires collaborations at scale so that the execution then is also at scale and at pace to meet these 10-year requirements. So there's a massive opportunities that we are seeing, massive opportunities to build almost a new Eskom and a new NTCSA that is really future fit and future proof, because we believe that a healthy transmission grid, a healthy NTCSA, a healthy Eskom is a healthy South Africa.
This massive build that we're undertaking will require collaboration. It will require us to look at partnerships for us to be able to do something at this scale. And that then obviously, brings me to bringing in the independent transmission program that's now been launched, which obviously, this marks a new phase where private parties and private partners are now being invited to help support the government in building grid infrastructure, which is traditionally, as we know, being part of the state's domain. And really just wanting to dig in a bit on the national transmission program, which, so looking at the first round that's come out, we're looking at approximately 1.6 kilometers of lines in the Northern Cape, the Northwest, and in Gauteng, specifically 400 kV lines. From an NTC perspective, what is the NTCSA's role in supporting the coordination of a program like this? And what are some of the standards or alignments that you and your team are looking at to ensure then that we've actually got alignment across the broader grid along with the programs and the projects that the NTCSA is looking at currently?
The ITP program is a subset of the transmission development plan. So the 14,000 kilometers that I've spoken about, the ITP program is a part of that. Because of the massive project that the TDP is, NTCSA simply does not have the balance sheet to carry all of that. I think that's reality number one. We require in excess of about 200 billion rand for the full TDP. I think we've made allocation of about 133, which is what we have. So there's a delta that we need to plug. That's the first point that has to be made regarding the ITP. The second point regarding the ITP is that because of the scale of the rollout of the infrastructure that is required, we require other sort of acceleration mechanisms, of which the ITP is one of those. So both from a funding point of view, from a point of view that says let's bring in other players into this space, we cannot do it alone. The department has run the ITP program. So what has been our role on the ITP? Our role is to be the enabler of the ITP. The projects that are on the ITP are developed by NTCSA. From a development point of view, we have went and identified all the routes, procured the land, done the designs, and literally the projects are shovel ready. And so when the ITP program kicks in, it will be just a matter of constructing and commissioning and connecting onto the grid, so which will then speed up the process. So we are full participants in the ITP program. We do a bit in terms of our commitment. We need to make 500 kilometers available on an annual basis for future phases of the ITP. This, in our view, will accelerate the execution of the transmission development plan to a shorter period.
Yes, it all actually fits in quite perfectly, as you're tying it from your from the transmission development plan down to actually bringing the private sector in. And I think, to the point that you'd made earlier, and that we've come a long way in the sense of, we've moved from the constant load shedding that we've experienced as a country. One would almost say that from a generation perspective, we have a lot more certainty than we had before. But the challenge we now have is, almost a mismatch between generation and actually being able to get that electricity and that necessary electricity to end users. And I think this also, and I wanting to come dig in a bit more around, areas like the Northern Cape, where, we've previously seen a congestion of renewable energy projects, and there not being sufficient grid capacity in that area. So we're seeing that, obviously, as part of the rollout and as part of the program, it is then taking into account, I would say, the broader issue that we're facing, which is where we potentially have a mismatch between where energy potential exists and where the grid can then carry it. So again, areas like the Northern Cape, which have historically been quite resource rich, but have been constrained to limited transmission capacity. I want to hear from you then, and especially, as part of your role at the NTCSA, it's one, obviously ensuring that we've deployed enough transmission lines to support expansion of the grid, but it's also then looking at spatial planning issues and how do we then improve access to these high energy zone areas. And I wanted to just hear from your perspective, how is the NTCSA looking at this? How do you then connect this thinking or this strategy to initiatives such as the ITP?
Yeah, so Thokozile, I think South Africa is well endowed with resources, whether it is the stuff that is underground, whether it's the stuff that is in the sky. This is the sun and the wind. So I think from that, in terms of our endowment, we are blessed as a country. The South African context is that where consumption happens of electricity, it's around the major industrial hubs. So this is your typical, your Gauteng and your KwaZulu-Natal, going down to the Western Cape. This is really where the major consumption takes place. Resource availability, or the generation availability, is elsewhere. So in the case of coal, traditionally it was in Mpumalanga where the coal basin was. So we would actually build power stations literally on top of coal mines. And then you'd burn that coal to generate electricity. Now the load or the demand or the consumption is elsewhere in the country. This is where you need the transmission grid now to move that energy that is produced in those places to areas where it is required. The advent of renewable energy has actually given us a different set of opportunities and a different set of challenges, in that your major sources of solar are mainly in the Capes, specifically Northern Cape, and your major wind resources are sitting in the Southern Cape. So again, this is not areas where major demand or major consumption is taking place. So you need to move this energy to areas where where it is consumed. So again, this is where now the transmission grid and the transmission infrastructure plays a major role, connecting those generators to the end consumer. Yeah, if there is a break in the process, then simply you just don't have lights. So that's why it's important to make sure that the grid is there. Number one, the grid is healthy. The grid is also flexible, because introducing all of these renewable energy sources now introduces other dynamics that traditionally, with our traditional consumption patterns we were not that we were not used to. So it requires us to really adapt in terms of technology and how we integrate these renewable energy sources so that we maintain the stability of the grid. Again, grid stability is the key focus of the system operator. We often hear of places such as Spain where the grid collapses in its entirety. This is what consumes the system operator on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a minute-by-minute basis.
Thank you for that. And it's great that you're actually touching on the system operator, because obviously as part of the role that NTCSA has, it's not just about building transmission lines, but part of the realm of your responsibility or the scope is also then of taking up the system operator role. So as a planner and strategic player then in this evolving energy landscape. So as we look at the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act and other reforms that are reshaping the electricity landscape in South Africa. Could you break down for us, what are the core then responsibilities that the NTCSA is focused on, and how is the role of the National Transmission Company evolving in relation to planning and system operation and access?
Yeah, so in this evolving ecosystem, so again, informed by the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act, so the NTCSA's role is also evolving. Besides being the operators of the grid, which traditionally the NTCSA was in the main, therefore we also manage the grid itself through the system operator. So now the system operator's role is quite simple. Keep the frequency at 50 hertz. Any deviation, whether it's because of loss of generation or loss of load, the system operator needs to kick in and act in a way that corrects and manages the oscillations on the grid to bring it back to stability. So that is as I've indicated, the daily role, hourly role, and a minute-by-minute role that the system operator then plays. Coupled with that, we are also, as part of the ERAA, we need now to set up the market operator. So this market operator is really to facilitate the trade of energy. So now this market operator, it is really to bring buyers or players in the energy market, to bring them in to basically connect the buyers of the energy and the producers of this energy. So that platform that is called the market operator will be where that all of that is taking place. Then we've got another element of the NTCSA called the Central Purchasing Agency. As you know, we have been running the Independent Power Producer Program since around 2010. So through these programs, we've got what we refer to as legacy contracts that these independent power producers have with what is currently the single buyer office. So the single buyer office will then be converted to be this central purchasing agent. So effectively, those then make up the four main elements of the National Transmission Company South Africa. Coupled with this, Thokozile, is we've got a fairly expansive telecoms network that is linked up to the grid itself. We require this telecoms network to be able to, in real-time basis, manage and control the network. So we have to run this telecoms infrastructure so that we are able to actively see what is happening at each of our substations, on each of our lines, on a real-time basis. So this is how we then start to sort of modernize the grid itself. You spoke earlier on about grid modernization, so this is a significant part of this grid modernization.
Thank you for that. And I guess also it really goes to the heart of the market reform that we're currently seeing, right? So as we liberalize the South African electricity supply sector, we then do see, a number of new players that are coming in. And I guess at the core of it, it would have to be the NTCSA, so if you're touching on the fact that, this the South African the wholesale market that's now being set up. You kind of can't have a market without the NTCSA being at the heart of it, because at the end of the day, where will these players be trading their power on? It goes back to the overall grid and the system that then needs to be maintained. And obviously, outside of that, there was already, as you're saying, there was already a single buyer market at play, but now we need to really be taking into account a broader role of your central purchasing agency. So you kind of get to see all of these moving pieces, all of these moving players that are then involved in the reform South African electricity supply market. And at the heart of it then is the grid, is the backbone that we need to ensure is strong enough for it. And I guess also, we've got there's a big vision in terms of grid expansion. And we've touched on the 14,000 kilometers of transmission lines that need to be added over the next decade. But obviously that also goes back to, and I guess the main issue is the fact that, not only are we expanding the grid, but it's because we're actually looking at about 50 gigawatts of new generation that's expected to come online. So the current grid that is operational needs to be able to support what the current build projects that are being completed, as well as the anticipated new build projects that are due to come online, as well as obviously, in your new privatized liberalized market, you then also have all of these private trades that are then going to be going on. So with this, this massive new generation that's expected to then come online over the next decade as well, from an NTCSA perspective, what are the kinds of grid capabilities, technologies, or operational practices that are being introduced to really ensure smooth integration? Because as I'm understanding it, we can't afford to have anything go wrong on the grid, because what happens on one side of the grid inevitably would have an impact on the entire grid. And I suppose then, that's quite key in this modernization of the grid. So from an NTCSA perspective, what are some of the grid capabilities, technologies, or practices that you and the team are looking at, especially also taking into account, that we're looking at decentralized energy sources as well?
Yeah, maybe let's start first. You touched on the issue of the market reforms and the South African wholesale electricity market. So yeah, we are in the process of driving all of that. So we have set up the SAWEM school. We call it the SAWEM school. We've started with the lectures that talk to this wholesale energy market, or electricity market. Yeah, I think it's pleasing to know that the first few courses were oversubscribed. We are continuing with that because the interest is just so great. So we're excited, to be quite honest, with the level of interest and the uptake in all of this. So yeah, we were quite excited on the prospect of setting up the market operator. It's going to be an important sort of show of intent from a country perspective when the market operator is set up. I may add, Thokozile, that the energy trading is not new to Eskom. We have been doing so for a couple of years, except that it had been internal to Eskom with the different power stations trading on a day ahead or and the likes. But yeah, now all that we're doing is just opening this up to the public. So yeah, on the issue of the integration of renewable energy to the grid. So as some of our stations get to their end of life, we need to retire them. So what you have, what we term to be base load coming off, and then in its place you replace that with what we term renewable source. And now the renewable sources that we have at the moment, because of their they're intermittent, they cannot be dispatched, they are self-dispatching, so it does create other operational challenges. Now, with the retirement of the baseload plants, now you start to lose inertia in the system because of the absence of these rotating machines. Now you lose this inertia in the system. Now it being replaced by the renewable energy that do not have inertia, then we start to have other operational challenges on the grid itself. So then grid stability then becomes quite tricky. The more renewable intermittent sources you connect onto the grid, the geography thereof is also quite key. So Eskom and NTCSA, we have been for some time looking at technologies. We have piloted a few technologies that talks to how we then either bring inertia back onto the grid, or how do we arrest the frequency on the grid. So we are looking at as part of the TDP rollout to install synchronous condensers at strategic locations on the grid to ensure that we maintain the inertia on the system. Yes, as we connect up more and more renewables, then we'll require more and more of these synchronous condensers. But we're also looking at grid forming technologies, grid forming battery storage systems, or storage systems rather, but that are grid forming. So this is we are looking at putting pilot projects for the grid forming BESS for starters, but we're also looking at other opportunities for storage. We are undertaking a project called Duatsi, which is going to be important. Duatsi is a hydro scheme. We believe that it's going to be quite important to how we just manage the grid itself. So again, from an engineering point of view, exciting times to be an engineer in Eskom, to be an electrical engineer in Eskom at this point, because again, we're dealing with new challenges that require innovation, that require different thinking from the traditional thinking. But yeah, I think quite exciting.
Exciting times ahead. I think, as you're saying, to be an engineer at this time and to be at the core face of all of these projects would be quite exciting. We keep speaking about these, these catalytic, these big projects that we then need to roll out, and of course none of this is actually going to be possible without financing, given the sheer scale. So the TDP calls for about 440 billion over the next decade. So I think in the conversation that we're having around the extension of the grid, the work that would be done, what role could we say then that public-private delivery models or infrastructure financing can play in us really ensuring that we're able to, meet this build requirement? At the end of the day, every man has a voice, but money is the volume. So how are we actually going to get everybody around the table? What role do you see all the different parties being able to play in us getting this over the line?
Yeah, Togo. So as I've indicated earlier on, much as we do have the TDP, we've got that as a counterplan. As a utility, or even as government, we do not have those volumes of money. So we are going to have to think differently about how we fund our infrastructure project, specifically the balance that cannot be undertaken through the capex that is available. We simply just do not have the balance sheet for that. So that is why interventions such as the ITP become so important, because now we start to bring in private sector into the space, to bring in their balance sheet, to bring in the expertise, but really to bring in collaboration for this joint national project. We are looking at other funding opportunities, different funding models, different project setup. So as we start to execute the TDP, we will be going out to market with these specific packages for specific projects, looking at how best we can execute those projects.
And again, I just want to, digging deeper into the role of collaboration and the collaboration that actually would be necessary to ensure success of the TDP. So if we're looking at transmission planning, it really then does need to align with broader energy sector developments, from the IRP to provincial development plans. So how does the NTCSA then work with other actors that are involved to ensure that the long-term planning that we have, remains coordinated and is in fact going to be responsive to any changing needs?
Yeah, so Togo, the TDP does not happen in isolation. There is a lot of input that goes into the TDP. We look at the demand forecast. We look at you spoke earlier on about spatial planning. We look at what the spatial plans tell us in terms of land use and the likes. And on the base of that, then we aggregate that to what would be termed a demand, meaning what size of capacity would be required for that particular geographic area. We would look at our energy forecast as a country, which then informs your IRP. So really your TDP, or then we'll also look at your IPP, your independent power producer plans, and what have they come to ask from us by way of application. So all of that put together culminate in what comes out as this one plan called the TDP. But it is literally a consolidation of all the other inputs to produce an infrastructure plan, an electrical infrastructure plan for the country. Now, in terms of how to ensure that we keep on track with our execution plans, with the funding plans that we've outlaid for the infrastructure rollout, we then start to monitor that progress. But yes, we need to have it accelerated. How we do that is to bring in the other players then to accelerate the execution.
Thank you for that, Monde. And really, again, highlighting the importance of the TDP as then being the central document in any kind of planning that really does take into account all of the moving pieces and moving parts when thinking of transmission in South Africa. I think even when you look at the ITP program that's come out, I mean, the technical requirements are literally the TDP. So it really just highlights again that for any ordinary South African really trying to understand or make headway of what's being spoken of from a transmission perspective, that TDP is really an amazing document to kick off with. And we've been touching on and speaking around, coordinating all of the moving parts. I would imagine that performance and transparency really becomes important in this process for us to really ensure that we are measuring progress that is being made. So for ordinary South Africans, they'd want to know, how is progress being tracked? So as we're looking at the grid being expanded, new projects coming online, what are some of the systems or indicators that are in place to track progress, to ensure transparency and continue to build stakeholder confidence in the NTCSA's delivery?
So in terms of our license requirement, we're obliged by the regulator to publish our TDP on an annual basis. So that then becomes the first sort of transparent, and it's very public, it's transparent, and there's lots of interest that gets generated. But then moving forward, we also play an active role at structures such as NICOM through Operation Vulindlela. So this is again where we sort of report on our progress on the TDP. Twice a year, Eskom does its what is referred to as the winter outlook and the summer outlook, we use that opportunity there as well, again, to communicate to the public how we're doing in terms of our performance against what we've set ourselves on the TDP itself.
I guess a longer term view and looking ahead and really trying to understand then from your perspective what success will look like. So let's say, we're 10 years from now, which would be, the end of, this TDP horizon. So we're looking ahead to 2034. What does success look like from an NTCSA perspective? What are some of the, outcomes that that from your perspective would really reflect the impact of the work being done today?
Yeah, I think the key one for me, the key success for me is having a generator anywhere in the country being able to connect at any point on the transmission grid without any constraint. I think for me that would be a big tick if you ask me what success looks like. For NTCSA, it would be a utility that is self-sustaining, that is standing on its 2 feet, that does not depend on government bailouts. For me, that would be a tick. For the market, it would be a liberalized market where players play openly and transparently in the market. I think for ordinary South Africans, affordable electricity prices.
And ending really at, I think, probably the key or the key success determiner that ordinary South Africans would then actually be able to have access to more affordable electricity. Monde, I want to close off the conversation with just a personal reflection from your perspective and leading at a very defining moment. You've had the privilege to have led across multiple parts and multiple organizations in South Africa's power sector. And I'd like to hear from you, what excites you most about this moment in South Africa's energy journey and NTCSA's role in shaping it?
So, Togo, what excites me is if you look at Eskom, not just NTSA, but Eskom as a whole, Eskom is 102 years old in 2025. So, at different times of Eskom existence, Eskom was done different things for South Africa. Now, at this defining moment, this is a time where Eskom has to redefine itself to be relevant for the next 100 years. And then NTCSA is spearheading that redefinition, that revival, that renewal. Again, we've seen the worst of load shedding. I see NTCSA playing the leading role in a South Africa that does not ever see load shedding again.
That's quite a it's quite a defining moment, and I think fortunately 10 years is a very short period of time, so we'll be able to hopefully in 10 years time come and find you and
Yes.
give you a big handshake for playing a very pivotal role in achieving this vision. And Monde, thank you again. Thank you, just to close off here and to say thank you so much for your time, for your clarity, and most of all for your leadership. We've been able to cover a lot today, from fast-tracked infrastructure to private sector partnerships and the long-term view on South Africa's grid transformation. The work ahead is clearly quite immense, but what is evident from this conversation is that the building blocks have been laid and they are in place, and it is encouraging to see that the NTCSA is stepping forward with purpose and with precision. To our listeners, if you found today's episode helpful, please share it, subscribe, and join us as we continue to explore South Africa's changing energy future, one conversation at a time. Until next time, let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you for joining us on the Energy Conversations podcast, powered by the African Energy Leadership Center at the Wits Business School. Together, we are committed to empowering communities and fostering meaningful dialogue around the South African energy sector. Remember to subscribe and let's shape South Africa's energy future together.